a sweet friend, dedicated nurse, and a loving mother. But after the birth of her fourth child turned into a total zombie who stared into spaces and couldn't finish sentences, said Andrea's friend. On June 20th, 2001, Andrea Yates, a 36-year-old mother, filled her bathroom tub and proceeded to kill 5 of her children by drowning. "I am Satan," she said, after being arrested for capital murder with possibility of death penalty. The story doesn't begin on June 20th, when Andrea was filling water in the tub to drown her kids, or when her mother caught her feeding solid food to her 5-month-old daughter. So let's understand how this nurse, who loved her children to death, goes on to become the case that changed the mental health care forever. 1989. 25-year-old Andrea Kennedy, a champion swimmer, meets Rusty Yates, also a 25-year-old Auburn University graduate. April 17, 1993. They get married, and at this point, Andrea is working as a nurse in a cancer center and Rusty worked as a NASA engineer. February 25, 1994. Andrea gave birth to her first baby boy, Noah, and she left her nursing career to become a full-time mother. In early 1995, Andrea becomes pregnant again, and at this point she started suffering with recurring visions of a person getting stabbed with a knife. She started alienating herself and cutting off from her friends. Birth of the second son. After the birth of her second son, Andrea started complaining of loneliness and depression. The Yates family at this point had started religiously following the teachings of Michael Veroniki, who had his own ministry called Cornerstone Christian Fellowship that claimed that he spread the teachings of Jesus. The Yates family followed Veroniki's teachings and patterned their lives around his. The family sold all their possessions at this time around. It is in Florida that Andrea gets pregnant twice, miscarrying once. In June of 1998, the couple, influenced by the teachings of Veroniki's, who preached a simpler life, decided to shift in a smaller GMC bus. Even though they had 3 children at this point, who I'm sure needed space to grow. Throughout 1998, Andrea becomes more secretive and stops interacting with people. February 15, 1999. Andrea gives birth to her 4th son at this time. On June 16, 1999, Andrea called Rusty at work one morning. When Rusty did reach home, he found her shaking uncontrollably, biting her nails in the back of the van. And when he couldn't calm her down, he took her to her mother's place. It is there where Andrea makes her first suicide attempt by overdosing on 40 pills, including trazodone and antidepressant. It is from there that she is taken to the Houston hospital, where she was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. The doctors later discharged her, saying that she was mentally unstable but not suicidal. Later in June, things started to get worse for Andrea. As she flushed all her prescribed medications, she would spend days lying in the bed and she would scratch her head until she had bald spots. She would cut her arms, legs, and refuse to feed her children. The voices in her head, as she claimed, had come back, and they would tell her to get a knife. July 20th, 1999. Andrea attempted suicide for the second time by holding knife to her throat in front of the mirror. She said she wanted to stop the voices in her head. After this attempt, she was admitted again into the psychiatric hospital. August 9, 1999. She was released from the psychiatric hospital, and the family had moved out from the small house in Houston. Her situation had improved drastically at this time. She had begun to homeschool her children and enjoyed making costumes for her children and others. As her situation improved, she had stopped taking medications. March 2000. Andrea happens to be pregnant again, even after the psychiatrists had warned her that having another child may induce another psychotic break. November 2000. Andrea gave birth to her 5th child and she named her Mary. On March 2001, Andrea's father passed away. This had a more deteriorating effect on her health. March 31, 2001, Andrea was admitted back to the hospital at this time around. Although she showed very little improvement, the psychiatrist discharged her, believing that Rusty would take good care of her. May 3, 2001. Yates' oldest son walks on her mother filling bathtub. When Yates' mother asked her what she was doing, she said, "I might need it." After this episode, she was re-hospitalized and put on medication Haldol. She had taken this medication before and it had significantly improved her health. But it didn't work this time. The psychiatrist again discharged her, saying that she was quote-unquote not suicidal. June 19, 2001. She played football with her husband and her oldest son Noah that night. She seemed completely fine when she went to sleep that night. There was nothing specially noticeable about her. June 20th, 2001. Yates concluded that her children are doomed to the fires of hell and that it is her fault. "My children are not righteous," she said, "and I let them stumble." Andrea had taken Veronica's teachings to heart, deciding that she was a bad mother and had assured her children's damnation. He had told her that the parents were responsible for ensuring salvation for their children. That morning, when Rusty left for work, Andrea filled the bathtub to 3 inches from the top. Yates walked to the kitchen and picked up the infant Mary, the youngest, taking her to the bathroom and putting her on the floor. She then walked Paul, the 3-year-old, to the bathroom. She gives Mary a bottle and then holds Paul's body under the water, killing him in a minute. She then carried him to the bed and tucked him under the sheet. Luke, her 2-year-old son, soon follows, and John, the 5-year-old, is next. The crying Mary is then drowned and left face down in the bathtub. Yates then ran to catch her 7-year-old, who had struggled but then also died next to his sister. She then goes to pick up the telephone and call 911, telling the dispatcher that she needs a police and an ambulance. She hangs up and calls Rusty at work, telling him, "It's time. I finally did it." And she asked him to come back home. So now here's everything that happened until June 20th, but we have so much more to understand to even begin to fathom that what led to June 20th. Andrea was diagnosed with postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis soon after the birth of her 4th son. We've heard bits of what postpartum depression is on the internet, but what is postpartum psychosis? I'll tell you both. To understand postpartum psychosis, we have to first understand what psychosis is. Psychosis refers to a collection of symptoms that affect the mind, where there has been some loss of contact with reality. During an episode of psychosis, a person's thoughts and perceptions are disrupted, and they may have difficulty recognizing what is real and what is not. Postpartum psychosis is the severest form of mental illness in that category, categorized by extreme confusion, loss of touch with reality, paranoia, delusions, disorganized thought processes, and hallucinations. It affects around 1 to 2 per 1,000 females of childbearing age and usually happens immediately within days to the first 6 weeks after birth. Although rare, it is considered as a psychiatric emergency that warrants immediate medical and psychiatric intervention. Hospitalization is also needed if there is a risk of filicide or suicide. Now coming to what postpartum depression is. Postpartum depression is a type of depression that happens after having a baby. People with postpartum depression experience emotional highs and lows, frequent crying, fatigue, guilt, anxiety, and may also have trouble caring for their baby. Around 1 in 7 women can develop postpartum depression, while women experiencing baby blues tend to recover quickly. Postpartum depression tends to last longer and severely affects a woman's ability to return to normally function. The tragedy of the Yates family. A series of errors had led to the tragedy of June 20th. There were a lot of missed opportunities for the prevention of what happened. The following account is a message of caution and hopes for better measures in the future and does not intend in any way to add any more suffering to the Yates family. Family history of psychiatric illness. Mrs. Yates' parents and siblings had a history of diagnosed and treated bipolar disorder and major depression. Family history of mental illnesses can increase the risk of postpartum psychosis. History of childbearing. Andrea Yates was persistently pregnant or lactating from 1994 to 2000. After her last 2 children were born, she had a total of 4 psychiatric hospitalizations. Each delivery was associated with another postpartum depression: inadequate psychiatric treatment and poor medical management. Mrs. Yates' hospitalizations were brief and discharges were often premature. Later, for unclear reasons, Mrs. Yates' psychiatrist discontinued her treatment 2 weeks before the tragedy. Inadequate psychoeducation and medical education. Although the couple was warned about the recurrence of postpartum illness, Mr. Yates explained that Mrs. Yates would spring back, feel better, and agree to have more children. Postpartum psychosis is a psychiatric emergency. Psychiatrists, nurses, social workers, and professionals along the way miss the signs of danger. Now, I don't know how everyone else sees this case, but it is in my most regretful words that we as a society failed Andrea Yates. She was failed by her state, who imposed life imprisonment on her, disregarding how much in need of medical help she was. She was failed by the healthcare system, who didn't take notice of her worsening psychotic condition. And most importantly, she was failed by her closest people, her family members, who described her as a caged animal and watched her as she rotted in her body. We as a society bear the responsibility of the 5 innocent children who lost their lives, and a mother who lost her battle to mental illness. And I would like to conclude the video by saying that until mental illness is addressed with same dignity as any other illness, the course will remain unchanged. So here was the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and please leave in the comments any remarks that you have about the video. You can also leave in the comments if there's any case you want me to cover or any specific topic you would like me to cover. Also, please like, share, and subscribe the channel if you haven't done it yet. And at the end, always be empathetic. Thank you so much.